Thoughts, first of all, on the strike action?
Well, nobody wants strikes, and I've spoken to ambulance crews, and they don't want to go on strikes. What I think the concern is that the government hasn't been listening, and the figures that we've published today, as a result of lots of freedom of information requests, figures the government didn't want you to know, show that the delays on ambulances are the worst ever. What they show is that people with serious life-threatening conditions, with potential strokes and heart attacks, the ambulances aren't arriving on time, and even when they do pick up the patient, they're having to wait for sometimes hours to get a bed in a hospital. And I just think of those patients there. Sometimes they'll be in serious pain. Their families will deeply worried, and the ambulance service under the Conservatives is failing at the worst records ever. And let's be clear, these figures that Liberal Democrats have obtained, the government didn't want you to know. They only publish the figures at a regional level, not the local level. We've gone down to 227 local areas to find which communities, many of them your viewers will be living in, where the ambulance service just aren't hitting the targets and are just delaying getting to people. And that's a real crisis for our NHS, and it comes on top of all the other crises we know. So this paints a picture for me of a government that just hasn't got a grip, and either they're completely out of touch, which is quite likely. They're certainly taking people for granted, and this chaos has to end. And so Liberal Democrats are calling for an action plan to sort out this, to get the staff we need, to sort out the resources we need for new ambulance stations and so on, and then we could get a grip of this.
Yeah, just to clarify, are you supporting the strikes or not?
Listen, no one wants people to go on strike. Of course they don't. We want to make sure that people don't have to go on strikes. And what's really surprising is I think the government should be talking to the unions to solve this ahead of Christmas. They shouldn't be allowing there to be this emptiness. And, you know, ministers aren't even going on the radio and the TV today to explain themselves, even though these are the worst figures ever for ambulance delays. Where is the government? We've been warning the government about this for well over a year. I'll give you an example. Okay, I was knocking on doors a year ago in the North Shropshire by-election. And in the rural communities in North Shropshire, we found that the biggest issue that people were raising with us was ambulance delays. Our excellent new Liberal Democrat MP, Helen Morgan for North Shropshire, has been raising this ever since she got elected after that by-election. She's asked for meetings, she's asked for investigations, she's been pushing this as hard as she can, supported by our health spokesperson, Daisy Cooper. And they've been saying they've talked to patients, they've talked to ambulance crews. Why isn't the government doing that? Why is the government failing on this so badly and be refusing to be held to account? And the reason we looked at this research and got all this new figures out there was to reveal those areas where it's seriously affecting lives and putting lives in danger. And there are some communities, particularly some rural communities, where I really worry that people are dying because the government haven't sorted out the ambulance service.
But what about, Sir Ed, if people die as a result of the strike action? That's why I'm pressing you, if I may, on whether you support it or not.
What I do want to see is that the emergency cover that the ambulance crews are saying they will provide, to make sure that really happens and supported by managers and the government. No one wants to see the strikes. We want to make sure that the emergency cover remains there. That's what they say is going to happen. It's crucial that it does. But I want the government to make sure the strikes don't happen in the first place. And the way to do that is for government to show that they are listening for once. They've refused to listen. For so long. They've been warned about this. They've been hiding away from the figures. They're hiding away from scrutiny. They have got to step in now. They're the government, and they could stop these strikes if they chose.
Now, I understand that, but with respect, you are not answering my question. And my question is, do you support strike action that puts patients' lives at risk? It's a yes or no question.
Okay. Okay, with respect, I've said nobody wants to see strikes. I've said that 3 times, and that
So you
is
don't
exactly
support
what
this
I think.
strike action then? You don't support the strike
Strikes
action?
strikes don't ultimately help, but the point is the government is the other party to this. And the government shouldn't avoid the responsibility. It wants to do that. It wants to try to blame everyone else when actually it's the government to blame. And when I've talked to ambulance crews, they are really worried about their patients. That they do this job, it's a hard job, it's a tough job. It's not really very well paid, but they do it because they want to serve their community. They want to make sure people who are potentially would die if they don't get to hospital get to hospital. They want to make sure people who need help, need pain relief, get that pain relief, and then they get to a doctor. That's what they do. They give their lives for that, and they have been suffering themselves, and they are extremely cross that the government doesn't look at the evidence, doesn't look at the facts, and doesn't work on behalf of millions of people out there who rely on these services. Isn't it a scandal, Kay, that in 2022 in the United Kingdom, when you call 999, you can't be sure if the ambulance will turn up in a reasonable time? The postcode lottery that people face in some areas of our country, they can't rely on that ambulance turning up. And ultimately, the government are responsible for that, and they can't hide behind the idea that this is suddenly news. They've known about this. We've warned about this, and I think it's one of the biggest scandals in the NHS. And let's remember that other parts of the NHS that are failing miserably too. You know, we've called for extra resources for GP appointments so that people can get earlier GP appointments. We've said that we need greater access to NHS dentists. We've pointed out that the promise that the government made to build 40 hospitals, I think Boris Johnson used to talk about 40 hospitals, that promise hasn't been delivered on. And it pains me to say this, but I think I've never known the NHS in such a crisis in our lifetime. And I just don't think the government have got a grips with this, and it's putting people's lives in jeopardy.